Morning.
I'm not saying anything.
It does feel so good to actually see people in person. It has been so weird over the last 18 months, preaching when there's no one there. So the first time I preached after lockdown, Mauricio was set up the camera to record at the Gateway Centre, and then he was hiding behind the screens, and you just don't know where to look. It's just so weird. And then when we went to streaming from my dining table, there's just me, the laptop. It's been the strangest thing. So thank you for turning up. It's good to see real people. And one of the things that I think has challenged many people during the lockdowns is that we feel like we've lost something. We feel like that important human contact has been taken away. And Zoom has been great, but it's not the same as actually meeting someone in person. But one of the things Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 10, is, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Now, when Jesus is saying they may have life and have it to the full, he's talking about you and he's talking about me. That's what the New International Version translates it as. New Living Translation says, my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. New American Standard Version says, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And I know a lot of you like the Passion Translation. That says, I have come to give you everything in abundance, more than you expect. Life in its fullness until you overflow. Now, they're slightly different translations, of course, but there's one clear purpose that comes through as to why Jesus came. And that is that he came so that you and I can experience full life, a rich and satisfying life, abundant life. Life in its fullness until we overflow. And I don't see any little clause added on in the end by a lawyer type saying, apart from during pandemics. But are you experiencing life to the full? Are you experiencing a rich and satisfying life? Abundant life? Life in its fullness until you overflow? Well, of course, we all know that there are times when, if we're honest, we feel we're not quite experiencing that. And I'm not bringing this up to condemn anyone who hasn't ticked the abundant life status on their Facebook page. I'm saying it because if Jesus claims that he came to give us fullness of life, then he intends to deliver on that promise. And if our lives don't feel like we're there yet, well, I believe that he intends to give us more, and that he intends to give us a fuller experience of life. Now, obviously, the final fulfillment of this abundant life will be when we're with him for all eternity. You read the book of Revelation and you see this multitude from every tribe, every nation, every tongue before the throne of God. Now that is going to be abundant, 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 super, super abundant life for eternity. But I believe we're also meant to experience some of this abundant life in this life. And when we have the Holy Spirit within us, He is going to be producing His fruit of love and joy and peace and so on. And that's part of what our abundance is about. That the Holy Spirit works in us and produces this wonderful fruit. And would you like to experience more of that today? And I think one of the big problems we face as humans is we often have a persistent problem with our hopes being dashed. We have a problem with prophetic words that haven't yet been fulfilled. We have a problem with dreams that have been torn to shreds. And so when people start talking about abundant life and all that God can do, we're sort of thinking, yeah, but where is it? What's going on? Why am I not seeing these promises fulfilled? Why is it not happening for me? But if any of these things are describing your situation, then the message is don't give up hope. Because many people go through such times and come out of the other side. Indeed, many of the key people in the Bible went through such times. But you may ask them, why does it happen? Well, sometimes people simply aren't ready to see their dreams fulfilled because God hasn't finished doing all the preparatory work, especially on their character. So think about Moses. You know, when Moses was age 40, he had this dream of leading God's people out of slavery. He felt God calling him to do that. But his heart was proud. His character was very dodgy. And so he murdered an Egyptian and had to spend 40 years having his character refined before God decided that he was ready to fulfill the dream. And if you think about it, those 40 years weren't wasted. God was working on Moses' character, but also he spent 40 years herding sheep in the desert, which he was then going to spend 40 years leading the Israelites through that same desert. So he spent 40 years learning every waterhole, every trap. It wasn't wasted 40 years. And for us, most of us probably have times when our dreams have not yet been fulfilled. But if the Holy Spirit is working in you, then He's going to be doing something. He's going to be changing your character. You may be learning new skills. Maybe He's giving you new gifts. And every day we're getting closer to the day when God says, right, you're ready now. And opens the door to whatever it is we've been dreaming. Another thing I come across is sometimes people just put their dream on a shelf and forget it for a while. Maybe give up hope. Or maybe they get bullied into laying their dream down by people who are threatened by that dream. Think of Joseph in the Old Testament. He had this big dream, and his brothers hated it so much that First they were going to kill him, and then they sold him into slavery. But the dream wasn't destroyed, and it came about in the end. In fact, it came to fruition at exactly the time when it was needed. It's what the New Testament would call the kairos time. You see, the ancient Greeks had two words for time. There's chronos and kairos. Now, chronos time is what we work on. Time on the clock, time on the calendar. That's the way our minds work. We're totally programmed that way. But kairos is an ancient Greek word meaning the right or opportune moment, or the supreme moment. So kairos time is not the time on the clock, but the time at which an event of significance happens. And Joseph's dream came to fruition at that right time, that kairos time, when people were starving, and God put him into a position to save countless lives. You know, I'm sure God can cope with clocks and calendars, but actually I'm sure also that much more he works on kairos time, waiting until it's the right time, the opportune time to move people into something new. So, is your kairos time nearly here? Has God been refining your character? So you're almost ready. Has God been training you? Is the dream maybe beginning to reawaken a bit as the time draws near? And remember, if God puts that dream in your heart, its time will eventually come. We're living through times of great change. It may well be that a lot of you start moving into new things as new opportunities open up again. Moving on, Jesus also said in Matthew chapter 11, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Again, I'm going to ask, is that your experience? Have you found rest for your soul? You see, one thing I've observed over the years is many Christians take up a yoke and try to carry a load for Jesus, but they find that it's a heavy load, and so after a while they get tired. And I say that as someone who's been both a missionary and assistant pastor of a church. There have been times when I have found it a heavy load, and times when probably all my fellow workers found it a heavy load. So what's going wrong? Well, one thing that goes wrong is that I think we often carry burdens that God doesn't want us to carry. And this seems to take two main forms. Firstly, we do this with our own lives. We may find that our finances are stretched, or our relationships are messed up, or we face sickness or whatever. And we humans do have a tendency to try to fix things ourselves. Sure, we pray for guidance, but then we work hard in our own strength. We ask God for wisdom for how to do things, but then we continue working as hard as possible, as if we can do everything ourselves, as long as God just shows us how. To use a mechanical analogy, we try to use God like a divine Haynes manual who will show us how to fix our car. Now, in case you don't know, Haynes manuals show you step by step how to repair all sorts of problems on your car. Or for the 30s, it's basically a a paper version of the YouTube car repair videos. Yeah. So, you know, as Christians, it's like we're trying to find the right page which will show us how to repair the clutch, and then we pick up our tools and try to do the job ourselves. Obviously, for car and clutch, substitute whatever life issue you're trying to fix. We ask God how to fix the problem, and then we're rather prone to trying to rush off and fix it ourselves. Well, sometimes we can get a long way doing that, but the burden is heavy, and sooner or later we'll get tired and we'll need help. But I think God is not expecting to be treated as a Haynes manual. He's more like the divine mechanic, who's delighted to roll his sleeves up and get his hands dirty fixing things. And if God is the divine mechanic, we need to make certain we're not getting in his way. You know, going back to the analogy of an engine, you know, if I'm sticking my hands in the way and he's trying to do the job, I'm just hindering God. There are times when we need to get our hands dirty and do stuff. But there are also times when we need to wait and let God do his part. And that might even be thought of as a definition of faith. Standing back and letting God do stuff. Because an awful lot of our rush and our activity comes from a place of fear and doubt. It's like, oh, God's not fixing it. I'm going to give him a hand. I'm going to rush in and I'm going to do it because God's fallen asleep or something and I need to help him. And that's not faith. That's building things on our own abilities. And the outworking of that is that we end up tired and fearful and having to come back to God again and say, I can't do this. Another reason we may find the loads to be heavy is that we tend to view caring for other people as being all about us carrying their loads, rather than all about God, who is the strong one carrying their loads. But hey, if we can't carry our own burdens properly, why do we think we can carry someone else's? That does not make sense. Sure, we have to play our part, but our part isn't to think that we've got the answers to other people's problems. Our part isn't to think that we're responsible for turning someone else's life around, or sorting their financial problems, or breaking their addictions, or healing their mental health issues, or restoring their relationships. That's the part that God willingly plays as he pours his love into the life of the other person. Our part is to walk alongside other people as Jesus does that. And that's why the burden is light, because Jesus does all the heavy lifting. And you can see an example of someone who didn't find their yoke easy or their burden light in the story of Mary and Martha when Jesus visited their home. Now, I have found that this is a story that really angers and threatens and upsets many, many Christians. And I do mean angers and threatens and upsets. In fact, of all the stories the Gospels tell us about what Jesus said and did, this story is the one that I've seen provoke the most severe responses from Christians. I'm not talking about non-Christians. From Christians. So let's look at it. It's in Luke 10. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things. But few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." So, what's going on in the story? Jesus has come to stay, and Martha has decided to go all out and make a massive feast. And she's getting really stressed because the firewood's damp and the potatoes aren't boiling, and she's still got 5 more dishes to prepare, and so on and so forth. Mary, meanwhile, is sitting on the floor listening to what Jesus had to say. And that really riled Martha. So she goes to Jesus and demands that he send Mary to help with the cooking. Now, as ever, Jesus saw right to the heart of the problem. The problem wasn't the poor firewood, or the potatoes, or the other 5 dishes that hadn't even been started. The problem wasn't even Mary sitting listening. The real problem was that Martha was trying to do all sorts of things for Jesus that Jesus hadn't asked her to do. And it was making her worried and upset. So Jesus gently corrects Martha. "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one." That can actually be understood as only one dish. Jesus would have been happy with a simple meal of falafel or something. But Martha had decided to make a massive feast that he hadn't asked for. Jesus continues, "Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Now, as I said earlier, I've seen this story provide some quite extreme reactions from Christians who are busy doing things for Jesus, and who would rather like it if Jesus would give some other Christians a kick up the backside to come and help. But the problem is often not the other Christians who aren't helping. Quite often the problem lies with the busy people, whose busyness in getting them worried and upset and stressed and angry with their fellow Christians. And to such people, Jesus would say, "You're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Come and sit down and spend time with me." You see, God's always more interested in having a deep and loving relationship with you than he is in what you can do for him. As Trevor mentioned last week, God has a multitude of angels to do all sorts of things. And those angels are actually much more effective at doing things for God than we are. And best of all, they're sin-free, so they don't have the same mess in their lives that we have. So God doesn't really need us to help him. And when he does ask us to do things, his aim is to do things working alongside us as a father would with a little child. Because actually we're not very good at doing things for God. So think of the father with a little child, and the father wants to work with that little child, teaching new skills and working together in relationship. God doesn't simply give us orders and expect us to go off and do it all on our own. We are meant to work with God, not work for God. And God does not in any way want us slaving away in the kitchen on our own, getting sweaty and angry. There had been far too many sweaty, angry Christians around. Something that struck me for the first time as I was preparing this sermon is that Martha's attitude has a lot of similarity to the older brother in the parable of the lost son, also known as the prodigal son. And the older son had been busy in the fields working for his father, but he didn't have a close, loving relationship with his father. So when his younger brother returns and is accepted, all of that resentment that's built up falls over, and the older son starts mouthing off about how he's slaved for his father all these years. The story is in Luke 15 from verse 29. The older son answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." I'm never quite sure he had friends, to be honest. "But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes come home, you killed a fattened calf for him." Can you see the similarity in attitude to that of Martha? The older son felt he'd been slaving for his father. But had the father ever asked him to do that? Had the father ever wanted a slave? You see, it's clear from the father's reaction to his son's anger that the father's deepest desire was to have a loving relationship with both his sons. He already had loads of servants. He didn't need any more. He didn't need the older son to be a servant or a slave. He needed him to be a son, living in close relationship. So busy can lead us down a bad road where we end up angry with our brothers and sisters and end up distanced from God. And that's when we start to feel that God isn't helping us and other Christians aren't helping us. And then when God blesses someone else, we start to feel, that's not fair. I deserve that. And that's not a good place to be. It's certainly not a place where the yoke is easy and the burden is light. Now, to change the image completely, there's a sense in which we're meant to be like white-tailed eagles. Could we have a photo, please? Now, these are massive birds with a wingspan of 1.8 to 2.4 metres, or, yeah, you're old enough, 6 to 8 feet to know this. That's my arm span. It's 5'6". So they're a lot bigger than my arm span. In fact, the big females have a wingspan that's another 2'6" bigger than my arm span, which is nearly half as much again. They are enormous. Now, these white-tailed eagles have been reintroduced into the wild in Scotland, and they're doing very well. They're repopulating much of the west coast and parts of the Highlands. But in the last couple of years, they've also been reintroduced to the Isle of Wight. And these latest birds have each been fitted with satellite trackers so that scientists can learn about where they go and what they do. And one interesting thing that's come out of the study is that scientists are starting to get an understanding of the bird's hunting strategy. Because when you analyse the movements of the birds, which only fly in daytime, you find that they spend an average of 91% of the daytime just sitting in a prominent place and watching the world go by. Why? Have they been partying all night long and feel a little bit rough? Aren't they hungry? Shouldn't they be using all the available daylight flying around and hunting? In fact, it turns out that sitting in a tree or on a cliff is their hunting strategy. And scientists call it a sit-and-wait method of hunting for food. And the reason the eagles do this is because they've got such amazing eyesight that they can spot food from a long way off with no need to fly around looking for food. Last October, Catherine and I visited the Isle of Mull, and we saw this pair of white-tailed eagles. When we first saw them, they were just sitting and waiting in a tree overlooking a loch. A little later, we moved around the other side of the loch, which was maybe 1.5 miles away from the tree. And suddenly, this pair of eagles came flying over and swooping down over the water. And what was going on was that from 1.5 miles away, they had spotted that an otter caught a big fish, and they'd flown over to try and steal it. Now, the birds may have looked like they were doing nothing when they were sitting in the tree, but in fact they were totally focused on looking for a meal. Now, you probably didn't come to church to listen to me coming over on Chris Hacken. So, why am I telling you all this? Well, the reason is I think we can learn a lot for our spiritual life from these eagles. In particular, we need to learn to stop and look. See, many of us have this tendency to rush, constantly running around, trying to do our jobs and care for our family, and also doing all sorts of things for God. But while we're rushing, we often don't take time to stop and look to see the things that God actually wants us to do. In a sense, we get so caught up in doing things for God that we don't stop to ask Him what He would like us to do. And if we do that, then we tend to end up stressed and angry. Now, for many people, lockdown has given us more time to stop and look. Many people have had to work from home and go out less. So we've had more time for reflection. And obviously for us as Gateway, so much has changed with selling the building, and maybe we've been doing all sorts of things in the church setting which we're no longer doing. And with all the restrictions and everything, everything has changed. But now as the government starts unlocking things more and we move into the next phase, the big question that we do need to all ask ourselves is, as we return to a more normal state, are we simply going to go back to rush? Or are we going to prioritise taking time to sit and watch for God-given opportunities? To sit and watch to see what God actually wants us to do, rather than, we've been doing this for 20 years, we must carry on doing it, rush. We've been given a real chance for re-evaluation, both as a church, but also in our individual lives. And if we can learn to watch and see what God actually wants us to do, I believe that we'll probably be far closer to finding that Jesus' yoke is easy and His burden is light. God bless you.